A shadow fell across Cassidy James' bruised face as she crouched behind the general store, trembling fingers pressing against her swollen eye. The year was 1875, and Hays City, Kansas, offered little sanctuary from the demons that haunted her, especially when those demons shared her blood. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of the frontier town. Cassidy had arrived in Hays City just 3 months prior, following her brother Vernon after their parents' death from typhoid back in Missouri. With no other family to turn to, she had little choice but to join him in the growing railroad town, where he'd secured work as a clerk at the land office. What Vernon hadn't mentioned in his letters was his growing dependence on whiskey and gambling, or his violent temper when either went poorly. "Miss, are you all right back here?" The deep voice startled her, and Cassidy instinctively raised her arms to shield her face, only to wince at the pain shooting through her ribs. The man stepped back, hands raised in a peaceful gesture. Tall and broad-shouldered, he cut an imposing figure against the setting sun. His face was partially shadowed by a well-worn Stetson, but she could see concern etched across his weathered features. "I don't mean to frighten you, madam." He kept his distance, seeming to understand her fear. "Name's Xavier Prescott. I work cattle at the Henderson Ranch south of town." Cassidy remained silent, eyes darting toward the street. If Vernon found her talking to a strange man, especially a cowboy. "Your eyes," Xavier said softly, his gaze fixed on her blackened left eye and the purple bruising spreading across her cheekbone. "Someone did that to you." It wasn't a question. Cassidy looked away, shame burning through her despite knowing she'd done nothing to deserve Vernon's rage. "It's nothing," she whispered, the lie bitter on her tongue. "I fell." Xavier's expression hardened, though not at her. "No, madam, that's no fall." He crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. "I've seen that kind of hurt before. My ma had those same marks whenever my pa came home in a temper." Something in his quiet understanding broke through Cassidy's defenses. Tears welled in her eyes, the salt stinging the cut on her cheek. "It's my brother," she admitted, voice barely audible. He gets angry when he drinks." Xavier nodded slowly. "You got somewhere safe to go tonight?" Cassidy shook her head. "We share rooms above the land office. I was just waiting for him to pass out before going back." The cowboy straightened, looking thoughtful. "My sister works at the Harvey House restaurant. She's got a spare room since her boarder left last month. Would you consider staying there tonight? No strings attached, just a safe place to lay your head." Cassidy hesitated. Vernon would be furious if she didn't return, but the thought of facing him again tonight sent waves of panic through her body. "He'll just be worse tomorrow," she murmured. Xavier's jaw tightened. "What's your name, miss?" "Cassidy. Cassidy James." "Well, Miss James, I can promise you one thing." His voice dropped steel beneath the gentle tone. "Your brother will never touch you again, not if I have anything to say about it." The conviction in his words made her look up, really meeting his gaze for the first time. His eyes were a clear, honest blue, the kind that couldn't hide a lie. There was something in them that made her want to believe him, despite everything experience had taught her about trusting men's promises. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." "Because no one helped my ma," he answered simply. "And I've regretted that every day since she died." The mention of death hung in the air between them. Cassidy knew the statistics, how many women didn't survive the rage of the men who claimed to love them. She thought of the bruises hidden beneath her high-necked dress, the crack she'd felt in her rib when Vernon had kicked her for burning his breakfast. "All right," she finally said. "Just for tonight." Relief washed over Xavier's face. "Thank you for trusting me, Miss James. I promise you won't regret it." He helped her to her feet with careful hands, keeping a respectful distance as he led her through back alleys to avoid the main streets where Vernon might spot them. The Harvey House restaurant stood near the train station, a beacon of civilization in the rough frontier town. Xavier explained that his sister, Florence, had come west as one of the famous Harvey girls who served the railroad passengers with efficiency and grace. Florence Prescott turned out to be a no-nonsense woman of about 30, with the same honest blue eyes as her brother. She took one look at Cassidy's face and ushered her inside without a word, sending Xavier to fetch hot water and clean rags. "You're safe here," Florence assured her, helping Cassidy remove her shawl. "Harvey has strict rules about his establishments. No men allowed upstairs and the doors locked tight." "My brother," Cassidy began, fear clenching her stomach. "Won't know where you are," Florence finished. "And Xavier won't tell him, no matter what." As Florence helped clean the cuts on her face, Cassidy learned that the Prescott siblings had come to Kansas from Texas 5 years earlier. Xavier had fought briefly in the war as a young man, then returned to ranch work, saving enough to buy a small parcel of land outside of town that he was slowly building up. "He's a good man," Florence said quietly. "One of the few. Our pa wasn't, and X swore he'd never be like him." Cassidy nodded, wincing as Florence applied witch hazel to her bruises. "Vernon wasn't always this way. After our parents died, something in him changed. Or maybe it was always there and I just never saw it." Florence's eyes softened with understanding. "It's not your fault, you know. Men like that, they choose their path." Later, after a hot meal and a bath, luxuries Cassidy hadn't enjoyed since leaving Missouri, she settled into the small but clean room Florence offered. The bed was soft, the sheets freshly laundered, and for the first time in months, Cassidy felt the tightness in her chest ease slightly. She hadn't meant to sleep, but exhaustion claimed her. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the small window, and for one disorienting moment she forgot where she was. Then the pain in her ribs reminded her, and the events of the previous day came flooding back. A soft knock at the door made her tense. "Cassidy, it's Florence." "I've brought breakfast if you're awake." Relief flooded through her as she called for Florence to enter. The older woman carried a tray with coffee, toast, and eggs, setting it beside the bed with a kind smile. "How are you feeling this morning?" Cassidy touched her swollen eye gingerly. "Better, thank you. I should probably get back before Vernon. Xavier's taking care of it," Florence interrupted gently. "He rode to see the marshal this morning." Panic seized Cassidy's heart. "No, Vernon has friends at the law office." "He'll never forgive me if—" "It's not about forgiveness, dear." Florence sat beside her on the bed. "It's about keeping you alive. My brother found out some things about Vernon James that you should know." According to Florence, Xavier had discovered that Vernon had fled Missouri not because of opportunity in Kansas, but because he'd severely beaten a young woman who refused his advances. The woman's father was a judge who'd issued a warrant for his arrest. Vernon had changed his name slightly from Jameson to James and slipped away in the night. "The marshal here is wiring the authorities in Missouri," Florence explained. "But in the meantime, they're holding Vernon for public drunkenness and disturbing the peace. Seems he tore up the saloon looking for you last night." Cassidy felt dizzy, the room spinning slightly. Everything she thought she knew about her brother seemed to be crumbling. The idea that this wasn't his first violent outburst against a woman made her stomach churn. "What do I do now?" she whispered. Florence squeezed her hand. "You heal, you rest, and when you're ready, you figure out what you want your life to look like without him in it." The next few days passed in a blur. Cassidy remained at the Harvey house, helping Florence with light chores as her strength returned. The bruises on her face began to fade from angry purple to sickly yellow-green. and she could take deeper breaths as her ribs slowly healed. Xavier visited daily, always respectful, always keeping a proper distance. He brought news each time. Vernon was still in jail. The Missouri authorities had confirmed his outstanding warrant. Arrangements were being made to transport him back east to face charges. "You're free of him," Xavier told her on the fourth day, as they sat on the small back porch of the Harvey house. "The marshal says there's evidence he's wanted for similar offenses in 3 states. He won't be bothering anyone for a very long time." Relief and grief warred within Cassidy's heart. Despite everything, Vernon was still her brother, her last living relative. The idea of being truly alone in the world was terrifying. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted. "I have nowhere to go." Xavier looked thoughtful. "Do you want to go back to Missouri?" Cassidy shook her head firmly. Too many memories lurked there, both good and painful. "Then stay," he suggested, his voice carefully neutral. "Hays City needs school teachers. Florence mentioned you taught back home before coming here." Cassidy felt a small spark of hope ignite. "I did. I loved it, actually. But the school board here would be mighty impressed by your credentials," Xavier finished with a small smile. "I took the liberty of speaking with Mr. Weatherby. He's head of the school board and a regular at the Harvey house. He said they're desperate for a teacher for the fall term." For the first time in months, Cassidy felt something like excitement stirring in her chest. "You did that for me." Xavier's cheeks reddened slightly under his tan. "Just presenting options, Miss James. No pressure either way." 2 weeks later, Cassidy stood before the Hays City School Board. Her bruises faded enough to be covered with powder, her confidence slowly returning. With letters of recommendation from her previous teaching position, and a strong endorsement from Florence Prescott, whose standing in the community as a Harvey girl carried surprising weight, Cassidy was offered the position for the fall term. "You'll need to find suitable accommodations, of course," Mr. Weatherby informed her. "The school teacher must maintain the highest moral standards." "I understand," Cassidy replied. "Mrs. Prescott has kindly offered to continue boarding me until I find appropriate lodgings." The truth was more complicated. Florence had indeed offered to let Cassidy stay, but they all knew it was a temporary solution. The Harvey house had strict rules about employees boarding family members long-term, and Florence couldn't risk her position. Xavier had another solution, one he presented to Cassidy that evening as they walked along the edge of town, the summer sun still high in the early evening sky. "My neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, is looking for a boarder," he explained. "She's a widow, very respectable. Lives about a mile from my place, closer to town than I am. She could use the income and you'd have a proper room with a decent breakfast and dinner included." Cassidy considered the offer. "Is it proper, being so far from town?" Xavier understood her concern. After what she'd been through, propriety was more than just a social convention, it was protection. "Mrs. Holloway is a founding member of the local church," he assured her. "And there's a young couple renting her back house. You'd have privacy but not isolation." As July melted into August, Cassidy settled into her new life. Mrs. Holloway proved to be everything Xavier had promised: kind but not intrusive, proper but not rigid. The small room under the eaves became Cassidy's sanctuary, a place that was truly hers for perhaps the first time in her life. She spent her days preparing lessons for the coming school year and her evenings often in the company of Xavier, who would ride over after finishing his work at the ranch. Sometimes they would simply sit on Mrs. Holloway's porch, talking about books or local gossip. Other times, Xavier would escort Cassidy into town for church socials or community gatherings. Never once did he push for more than friendship. though Cassidy sometimes caught him looking at her with an expression that made her heart flutter in a way that was both frightening and exhilarating. "You're different from any man I've known," she told him one evening in late August as they walked back from a town meeting about the railroad expansion. Most would have expected compensation for their help. Xavier's steps faltered, and for a moment Cassidy feared she'd offended him. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "What happened to you, what your brother did, that wasn't your fault, and helping someone who's hurting isn't something that creates a debt." He looked at her directly, moonlight silvering his features. "You don't owe me anything, Cassidy." "Not now, not ever." The use of her first name, so careful and deliberate, sent warmth spreading through her chest. In that moment, standing beneath the vast Kansas sky, Cassidy realized she was falling in love with Xavier Prescott, and the thought terrified her. The school term began in September. Cassidy threw herself into teaching, grateful for the distraction from her confusing feelings. Her 28 students ranged from 6 to 16 years old, a challenging group that required all her attention and creativity. To her surprise, she excelled. The children responded to her patient instruction, and even the town's more influential families began to express approval of the new schoolteacher. "You've impressed old Mrs. Benton," Xavier told her one Sunday after church, "and she hasn't approved of anyone since President Lincoln." Cassidy laughed, the sound still somewhat unfamiliar in her own ears. "She only likes me because I convinced her grandson to finally learn his multiplication tables." Xavier's smile warmed his entire face. "Maybe, or maybe she recognizes quality when she sees it." Such compliments still made Cassidy uncomfortable, but less so than before. Slowly, she was learning to see herself through others' eyes, not as damaged goods or someone's property, but as a woman of value and capability. October brought harvest festivals and Halloween preparations. Cassidy organized a school pageant, spending extra hours after class helping students rehearse their parts. One evening, she lost track of time and found herself walking home alone as dusk deepened into true darkness. The sound of hoofbeats behind her sent a jolt of panic through her body, a remnant of old fears that hadn't fully healed. She whirled around, heart pounding, only to see Xavier riding toward her. "Miss James," he called, slowing his horse. "I thought you might like an escort home." The relief that flooded through her was so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "How did you know I'd still be at the school?" Xavier dismounted, leading his horse beside her. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you hadn't returned for supper. I figured you were working late on the pageant." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you. I lost track of time." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the soft thud of Xavier's boots and the occasional snort from his horse. "My brother's trial is set for next month," Cassidy said suddenly. The news had arrived by telegram that morning, and she'd been carrying the weight of it all day. Xavier glanced at her. "Will you go back for it? They want me to testify." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "About what he did." "And will you?" Cassidy took a deep breath. "I think I must, not just for myself but for the others. The prosecutor says there are at least 3 other women." Xavier nodded, his expression grave. "It takes courage to face something like that." "I'm not sure I have enough," she admitted. "You have more than you know," Xavier replied softly. "But you won't have to face it alone. I'll go with you if you'll allow it." Cassidy stopped walking, turning to look at him in the gathering darkness. "You would do that? Travel all the way to Missouri just to support me?" "I would." There was no hesitation in his voice. "You shouldn't have to face him alone." The offer overwhelmed her. No one in her life had ever put her needs first that way, not her parents, who had always favored Vernon as their only son. Certainly not Vernon himself. The realization that Xavier was offering her unconditional support without asking for anything in return broke something open inside her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do so much for me?" Xavier's expression softened. "Because you deserve it, Cassidy." "Because he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "Because I care about what happens to you." There was something he wasn't saying. She could feel it hanging in the air between them. But he didn't press, and for that she was grateful. Whatever was growing between them needed time she still needed to heal, to rediscover herself beyond the shadow of her brother's abuse. The journey to Missouri was set for mid-November. Mr. Weatherby arranged for a substitute teacher, and Mrs. Holloway promised to keep Cassidy's room ready for her return. As the date approached, however, Cassidy's anxiety grew. Nightmares plagued her sleep, vivid recreations of Vernon's worst moments. The night before their departure, she couldn't bear to be alone with her thoughts. Despite the late hour, she wrapped herself in a shawl and walked the short distance to Mrs. Holloway's garden, hoping the night air might calm her racing mind. She was surprised to find Xavier there, sitting on the small stone bench beneath the apple tree. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked as she approached. Cassidy shook her head, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the November chill. "Nerves, I suppose." Xavier moved over, making space for her on the bench. "Would you like to talk about it?" For a moment, Cassidy hesitated. She'd shared the basic facts of Vernon's abuse, but she'd kept the worst details to herself, too ashamed and frightened to speak them aloud. Tonight, though, with the journey looming before them, she felt the need to unburden herself. "The night before you found me," she began quietly, "Vernon lost badly at cards. He came home raging drunk, convinced I'd somehow brought him bad luck." Xavier remained silent, a steady presence beside her as she continued. He started with words. "Called me useless, worthless, said our parents would be ashamed of the burden I'd become." Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, as if telling the story was releasing its power over her. "When I tried to help him to bed, he grabbed my arm so hard it bruised instantly. Then came the first hit." Cassidy touched her cheek, remembering. "He'd slapped me before, but this was different. His rings cut my skin. I fell and he started kicking me. Ribs, back, anywhere he could reach. I couldn't breathe." Xavier's hands were clenched into fists on his knees, but he made no move to interrupt or touch her. "The worst part wasn't the pain," she whispered. "It was the look in his eyes, like I wasn't his sister anymore, like I wasn't even human." She took a shuddering breath. "When he finally passed out, I crawled to the wash basin. That's when I saw my reflection, my eyes blackened, blood on my face. I didn't recognize myself." "That's when you ran," Xavier said softly. Cassidy nodded. "I hid behind buildings all night, too afraid to go far in case he came looking." "Then you found me the next day." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me with that. I know it wasn't easy to share." "I needed you to understand," she replied, "before we face him tomorrow. He'll try to charm the court, make me out to be hysterical or confused. He's always been good at that, making others see what he wants them to see. The truth has power, Cassidy. Your truth spoken in your voice." Xavier finally reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the bench between them. "May I?" When she nodded, he covered her hand with his own, warm and calloused from ranch work. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, you've already won. You survived. You built a new life. You're teaching those children and making this town a better place. He couldn't break you." Cassidy turned her hand beneath his, intertwining their fingers. The simple touch felt monumental, a bridge between her past and whatever future might be possible. "I'm still afraid." "That's all right," Xavier assured her. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear, it's about facing it anyway." They sat in silence after that, hands joined, the night wrapping around them like a protective blanket. For the first time since learning of the trial, Cassidy felt something like peace settle over her. Whatever Vernon might say or do, she wouldn't face it alone. The journey to Missouri took 3 days by train. Xavier had arranged for a private compartment, understanding Cassidy's discomfort at being in close quarters with strange men. He took the adjoining compartment, close enough to assist if needed but maintaining propriety. They arrived in Jefferson City the day before the trial was scheduled to begin. The prosecutor, a serious man named Mr. Daniels, met them at their hotel to prepare Cassidy for her testimony. "Your brother has influential friends," Mr. Daniels warned. "His defense attorney will try to discredit you, make it seem like you're exaggerating or lying outright. Are you prepared for that?" Cassidy nodded, though her stomach churned at the thought. "I'll tell the truth. That's all I can do." "Sometimes the truth isn't enough," Mr. Daniels said grimly. "But in this case, we have other witnesses. You're not alone in your accusations." That night, Cassidy barely slept. Xavier had taken a room down the hall, and though she knew he was near, the knowledge that Vernon was in the same city just blocks away in the county jail made her feel vulnerable in a way she hadn't since leaving Kansas. Morning came too quickly. Xavier escorted her to the courthouse, where they found a crowd had already gathered. News of the trial had spread, and Vernon's position at the land office had made him something of a local figure before his crimes were exposed. "Ignore them," Xavier murmured as they climbed the courthouse steps, passing through whispers and stares. "They don't matter." The courtroom was austere and intimidating, all dark wood and stern-faced officials. Cassidy was directed to wait in an antechamber until called to testify, while Xavier found a seat in the gallery. The separation, though temporary, heightened her anxiety. When the bailiff finally called her name, Cassidy's legs felt like lead as she walked to the witness stand. She kept her eyes forward, avoiding looking at the defense table where she knew Vernon waited. The oath was administered, and she took her seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "Miss James," the prosecutor began gently, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." Cassidy cleared her throat. "Vernon was my brother. After our parents died last year, he invited me to join him in Kansas where he had secured work. And how would you describe your life together in Kansas?" "At first it was tolerable." Cassidy chose her words carefully. "Vernon was often absent working or at the saloon. When he was home, he was distant but not violent. When did that change?" "About 2 months after my arrival. Vernon began gambling more heavily. When he lost, he would return home in a rage." Her voice steadied as she continued, the story becoming easier to tell with each word. "The first time he struck me was over a burned meal. After that, the violence escalated." For nearly an hour, Cassidy described the abuse in detailed dates, specific incidents, the injuries she had sustained. The prosecutor had her identify photographs taken by the marshal in Hays City after Vernon's arrest, showing her bruised face and body. When it came time for cross-examination, Vernon's attorney approached with a predatory smile that made Cassidy's skin crawl. "Miss James," he began silkily, "would you say you were a financial burden on your brother after your parents' passing?" The prosecutor objected, but the judge allowed the question. Cassidy straightened her spine. "I contributed what I could. I cooked, cleaned, mended his clothes. I tried to find teaching work, but so you were dependent on him," the attorney interrupted. "And perhaps felt some resentment about that dependence." "Objection," Mr. Daniels called. "Counsel is leading the witness." "Sustained," the judge ruled. "Rephrase your question, counselor." The defense attorney changed tactics. Miss James, isn't it true that you have a history of exaggerating ailments for attention? Your mother's diary, which we have submitted as evidence, mentions your nervous disposition and tendency toward hysterical complaints. Cassidy felt her face flush with humiliation. Those words, written during her adolescence when she'd suffered from debilitating monthly pains, were being twisted to paint her as unstable. My mother didn't understand, she began. Just answer the question, Miss James. Yes or no, did your mother describe you as having hysterical tendencies? She used that word, yes, but, and isn't it possible that these alleged beatings were actually the result of your own clumsiness? Perhaps exaggerated to gain sympathy from the handsome cowboy who so conveniently rescued you. The insinuation hit Cassidy like a physical blow. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she looked directly at Vernon. Her brother sat smugly beside his attorney, a familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. In that moment, something shifted inside her, fear giving way to righteous anger. No, sir, that is not possible, she replied, her voice suddenly strong and clear. My brother beat me systematically and with increasing violence over a period of months. The night before Mr. Prescott found me, Vernon had broken my ribs and blackened both my eyes so severely I could barely see. I have the doctor's examination to prove it. She turned her gaze to the jury, 12 men watching with varying degrees of discomfort and attention. I am not hysterical. I am not confused. I am telling the truth about what my brother did to me and apparently to other women as well. If you choose not to believe me, that is your burden to carry, but it doesn't make my words any less true. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The defense attorney looked taken aback by her sudden confidence, while the prosecutor failed to hide a small smile of approval. No further questions, the defense attorney muttered, returning to his seat. Cassidy was dismissed from the stand, legs shaking as she made her way back to her seat. As she passed the gallery, Xavier caught her eye and gave a small nod of pride that warmed her from within. The trial continued with testimony from the other women Vernon had assaulted, each story reinforcing the pattern of violence and intimidation. Medical experts confirmed Cassidy's injuries were consistent with her account, not with accidents or self-harm as the defense suggested. On the third day, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. Vernon was sentenced to 15 years in the state penitentiary, his face contorted with rage as the bailiffs led him away. "This isn't over, Cassidy," he shouted as they dragged him toward the door. "You'll regret this, I swear it." Xavier was at her side instantly, a protective presence as the courtroom erupted in chaos. "He can't hurt you anymore," he reminded her, guiding her toward the exit. "It's over." But it wasn't quite over. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, and curious onlookers stared openly at the woman brave enough to testify against her own brother. The attention was overwhelming after months of quiet life in Hayes City. "I want to go home," Cassidy said quietly to Xavier as they pushed through the crowd. "Back to the hotel?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, home to Kansas." Xavier's face softened with understanding. "We'll leave first thing tomorrow." That night, in the safety of her hotel room, Cassidy finally allowed herself to fully process everything that had happened. Vernon's conviction meant true freedom, no more looking over her shoulder, no more nightmares of him finding her. The realization brought not just relief, but a profound sense of possibility. A gentle knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. Through the wood, she heard Xavier's voice. "Cassidy, are you awake?" She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," he assured her quickly. There's something I've been wanting to say and it never seemed like the right time, but after today, seeing your courage in that courtroom." He took a deep breath. "I'd like to speak with you properly if you're willing. Perhaps in the hotel restaurant. It's still open." Curious and a little apprehensive, Cassidy agreed. They found a quiet corner table far from other late-night diners. Xavier ordered coffee for them both, his hands fidgeting with the napkin as they waited. "What is it you wanted to discuss?" Cassidy prompted when the silence stretched too long. Xavier met her gaze directly. "Us, or rather, the possibility of us." The simple words set Cassidy's heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I've developed feelings for you, Cassidy. Strong feelings." His voice was steady despite the vulnerability of the admission. "I've tried to keep them to myself, knowing you needed time to heal without any pressure. But I can't in good conscience continue to spend time with you without being honest about my intentions." Cassidy felt a complex mix of emotions: joy, fear, hope, uncertainty, all tangling together in her chest. "Xavier, please," he interrupted gently. "Let me finish before you respond. I'm not asking for anything right now. I understand that after what you've been through, the idea of any man's attention might be frightening. I just want you to know that when you're ready to consider a courtship, I would be honored if you'd allow me to court you properly." The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't the smooth talk of a man looking for conquest. This was honest emotion from someone who had proven his character through actions rather than just words. "I don't know what to say," Cassidy admitted. "You don't need to say anything tonight," Xavier assured her. "Take all the time you need. Weeks, months, I'm not going anywhere." Cassidy reached across the table, tentatively placing her hand over his. "What if I don't want to wait weeks or months?" Xavier's eyes widened slightly. "Cassidy, are you sure? After everything, because of everything," she corrected him. "You've shown me what a good man truly is, Xavier. Not through grand gestures, but through constant respect and kindness. You kept your promise he never touched me again. You gave me safety when I needed it most." She took a steadying breath before continuing. "I have feelings for you too. They frightened me at first, made me feel vulnerable, but I'm tired of letting fear dictate my choices." A smile slowly spread across Xavier's face, transforming his features with boyish delight. "So you would consider us?" "More than consider," Cassidy confirmed, "though I'd like to take things slowly." "As slow as you need," Xavier promised, turning his hand to properly hold hers. "I'm just happy to know there could be in us to look forward to." The train journey back to Kansas felt entirely different from their tense travel eastward. Though they maintained propriety, Florence had taught Xavier the importance of protecting a lady's reputation. There was a new ease between them. Hands would brush while passing a book or newspaper. Conversations flowed more freely, and Cassidy found herself laughing more than she could remember doing in years. By the time they returned to Hays City, word of Vernon's conviction had preceded them. To Cassidy's surprise, the town's reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Her students greeted her return with hand-drawn cards, and several mothers stopped her after church to express their admiration for her courage. "You've given my Sarah something to look up to, Mrs. Peterson told her one Sunday. "A woman standing up for herself, making her own way. It's important for girls to see that." The winter months passed in a pleasant rhythm. Xavier called on Cassidy properly every Sunday after church, sometimes taking her for drives in his wagon if the weather permitted, other times simply sitting with her in Mrs. Holloway's parlor. They attended town socials together, danced at the Christmas ball, and gradually, the whispers about them shifted from scandal to speculation about wedding dates. For Cassidy, the courtship was a healing experience. Xavier never pushed for physical affection beyond what she initiated: a hand squeeze here, an arm offered there. He listened when she spoke and shared his own thoughts and feelings with equal openness. Most importantly, he never once made her feel that his kindness created a debt she needed to repay. As spring approached, Xavier began to speak more concretely about the future. His small ranch was doing well, with enough cattle to provide a comfortable if modest living. The house he had built needed work, he admitted, but it had potential. "I've been saving to add another bedroom and expand the kitchen," he told her one afternoon, as they walked along the creek that bordered Mrs. Holloway's property. "The porch needs rebuilding, too." Cassidy smiled at his transparency. "Are you asking for my opinion on home improvements, Mr. Prescott?" Xavier's cheeks colored slightly. "I suppose I'm wondering if you might someday consider it your home, too. Not now," he added hastily. "When you're ready, if you're ever ready." Cassidy stopped walking, turning to face him fully. The spring sunshine illuminated his earnest features, and in that moment she felt the last of her hesitation melt away. "Ask me properly," she said softly. Xavier's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." With careful movements, as if she might startle and flee, Xavier reached for her hands. "Cassidy James, I love you. I have since the moment you stood up to your brother in that courtroom, though I think my heart was already yours long before that. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up in Cassidy's chest, bright and clean like the spring creek beside them. "Yes, Xavier Prescott, I would be proud to be your wife." Their wedding took place in June, a simple ceremony in the white clapboard church where they had attended services together for nearly a year. Florence stood as Cassidy's maid of honor, while Xavier's foreman served as best man. Mrs. Holloway wept openly in the front pew, having come to think of Cassidy as the daughter she never had. The entire town seemed to turn out for the celebration afterward. Tables groaned with potluck offerings, and a local band played while couples danced under the open sky. Cassidy, wearing a cream-colored dress that Florence had helped her make, found herself the center of attention in a way that felt affirming rather than uncomfortable. "Are you happy?" Xavier asked quietly as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. Cassidy looked up at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Their new life together began that evening, as Xavier brought her to the ranch he'd worked so hard to build. He'd spent the weeks before the wedding preparing it for her arrival: fresh paint, new curtains Florence had helped him select, wildflowers in mason jars on every available surface. "It's not much," he said nervously as he carried her over the threshold, an old tradition he'd insisted on observing. "But everything here is yours as much as mine now." Cassidy took in the simple, clean rooms, the solid furniture Xavier had built himself, the bookshelves already stocked with her favorite volumes alongside his. "It's perfect," she told him honestly. "It's home." That night, as they faced the intimacy of marriage for the first time, Xavier's patience and gentleness proved to be exactly what Cassidy needed. He let her set the pace, responding to her cues with attentiveness that transformed what could have been a frightening experience into a beautiful beginning. "I love you," he whispered in the darkness, his voice full of wonder. "I'll spend my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Cassidy curled against him, feeling safe in a way she'd never known before. "I could never regret this. You're the best decision I've ever made." Life settled into a new pattern. Cassidy continued teaching through the next school year, riding to town each morning on the gentle mare Xavier had given her as a wedding gift. He worked the ranch, gradually expanding their herd and improving their property. Evenings were spent together reading, talking, planning their future. In the spring of their first year of marriage, Cassidy missed her monthly courses. The doctor in Hayes City confirmed what she had begun to suspect. They would welcome a child before Christmas. Xavier's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped, for equal parts excitement, tenderness, and protective concern. "Are you happy about it?" he asked as they sat on their newly rebuilt porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and pink. Cassidy placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "I am, though I'm nervous too. I didn't exactly have the best example of family growing up." "We'll write our own story," Xavier promised. "Make our own traditions." "What kind of traditions?" Xavier thought for a moment. "Sunday picnics when the weather's good, reading aloud in the evenings, Christmas stockings hung by the fireplace. Never raising our voices in anger," Cassidy added softly. "Never." Xavier's voice was solemn. "Our children will know only love and respect in this house." "That's my promise to you and to them." As Cassidy's pregnancy progressed, the community embraced the coming addition to the Prescott family. The women of Hayes City organized a quilting bee, creating a beautiful baby blanket from scraps donated by every family in town. Xavier's fellow ranchers helped him build a nursery addition to their home, refusing payment beyond a good meal and promises of future assistance on their own properties. Their son, William Thomas Prescott, arrived on a cold December night with the help of Florence and the town midwife. He had Xavier's blue eyes and a tuft of dark hair that Cassidy recognized from her own baby pictures. The moment Xavier held him, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, Cassidy knew that the family they were creating would bear no resemblance to the ones they had left behind. "He's perfect," Xavier whispered, carefully returning the swaddled infant to Cassidy's arms. "You're perfect. Thank you for our son." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. 2 more children joined their family. A daughter, Eleanor, arrived 2 years after William, followed by another son, Michael, 3 years later. The ranch prospered under Xavier's careful management, allowing them to add rooms to the house as their family grew and even hire help during busy seasons. Cassidy eventually left her teaching position to focus on raising their children, though she never stopped teaching. Their home became known for its library, and she often tutored neighboring children who struggled in school or needed advanced instruction beyond what the local schoolhouse could provide. Vernon's shadow occasionally fell across their happiness. He wrote to Cassidy once from prison, a letter filled with bitter accusations and thinly veiled threats that Xavier intercepted and shared with the marshal. But the fear his words might once have inspired had no power over the woman Cassidy had become. "He can't hurt us," she told Xavier calmly after reading the letter. "We're stronger than his hatred." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Cassidy with a trip to Denver, their first real vacation since their marriage. Florence came to stay with the children, now old enough to be excited rather than frightened by their parents' temporary absence. In their hotel room that first night, Cassidy found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Sometimes I think about that day behind the general store," she said as they sat by the window overlooking the growing city. "If you hadn't found me then." Xavier took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after a decade together. "Someone would have." "You're too strong not to have found your way eventually," Cassidy shook her head. "I wasn't strong then, I was terrified." "Being afraid doesn't make you weak," Xavier reminded her. "You survived, you rebuilt, you thrived. That's the definition of strength." She smiled, leaning into his familiar embrace. "We thrived together." When they returned to Hayes City, life continued its pleasant rhythm. William showed Xavier's aptitude for ranching, while Eleanor demonstrated her mother's love of books and teaching. Young Michael, still finding his path, seemed drawn to both worlds, happily helping with cattle one day and begging for stories the next. News reached them in the spring of 1890 that Vernon had died in prison, a fight with another inmate that he hadn't survived. Cassidy received the information with a complex mix of emotions. A brief, sharp grief for the brother he might have been, relief that his threats could never materialize, and finally, a sense of closure that allowed her to fully release the last of her fear. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked that night, finding her on their porch swing after the children were asleep. "I am," she said, surprised to find it true. "I mourned the loss of my brother years ago. This is just the final page of that chapter." Xavier nodded, understanding as he always did. "What would you like to do, Live?" Cassidy said simply. "Keep loving you and our children, watch them grow old together." She looked up at the vast Kansas sky, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet darkness. "That's more than enough for me." Xavier smiled, settling beside her on the swing. "That sounds like a fine plan, Mrs. Prescott." As they sat together, hands intertwined as they had been since that night in Mrs. Holloway's garden so many years before, Cassidy thought about the frightened young woman with blackened eyes who had crouched behind a general store, certain her life was over. How wrong she had been. Her life hadn't been ending that day, it had been just beginning. "I love you," she told Xavier, the words as true now as the first time she'd spoken them. "Thank you for keeping your promise." Xavier kissed her temple gently. "Which promise was that?" Cassidy smiled, remembering his words from long ago that had given her hope when she needed it most. "That he would never touch me again." "Ah, that one." Xavier's arm tightened around her shoulders. "That was the easiest promise I ever made, and the most important one I ever kept." Together they watched the stars. Two people who had faced darkness and emerged into light, creating a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the healing power of kindness, the strength found in vulnerability, and the enduring truth that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and tenderness. In the quiet of their shared life, far from the shadows of their beginnings, they had built something neither had dared to dream possible. A home where fear had no place and love reigned supreme. It was, Cassidy reflected as they rocked gently in the night air, everything she could have wished for and more than she had ever believed she deserved. "Home," she whispered, the word a prayer of gratitude. Xavier squeezed her hand in silent agreement. Home indeed, not just a place but a feeling. The feeling of finally, truly belonging.